What's up, Jets fans, and welcome to Ep.5 of JetNation Live. We are your hosts, Dylan Terman and Glenn Naughton. Folks, if you told me on August 12th when Zach Wilson went down against the Eagles in preseason that the Jets would be 2-2 in the first quarter of their season, I probably would have looked at you like you're absolutely nuts. But that is the reality. The Jets are 2-2 after the AFC North gauntlet, and it feels pretty good, honestly. I'm happy with the quality of this win as opposed to the Cleveland win. But let's kick it right to Glenn. Glenn, how you doing tonight, and how you feeling 2-2 out of the AFC North gauntlet?
Got to be feeling pretty good. Tough run of opponents, and the Jets handled themselves well, all things considered. And I think what you just said is what most people feel right now is that this win was a lot bigger than the Cleveland win, because the Cleveland win, yeah, it may have been more fun because it was such literally a miracle. When you look at just from a statistical, perspective, like the likelihood of that win. But this game was, it was more methodical. It required more long-term success and good decision making from the quarterback. Whereas with the Baltimore game, it was just so fluky, or not Baltimore, Cleveland. It was so fluky. Whereas this one felt like you went in and executed and did what you had to do to march down the field twice in the fourth quarter. And the defense showed up big. Biggest thing to me, defensive side of the ball anyway, was the safeties. I did a quick preview before the game, just sort of I did this a couple years ago. I thought I'd do it again this week, like sort of a last second look before kickoff, what to look for. And I kind of said, like, you gotta, if the safeties don't step it up, you got to make some changes because these guys aren't playing well. And they went out and they just dominated. I mean, LaMarcus Jordan was fantastic. And I think most people would agree that right now the safeties up to that point are what had been holding this defense back, because the corners have been good. Maybe the pass rush isn't as good as we would like, but there's a little something there. But yeah, Whitehead, Joyner, they balled out, and that was the difference.
Yeah, I don't want to poo-poo on Zach's return to regular season action after the injury, but that secondary really was the talking point of the day, and we'll get right into it. Our topics for tonight, obviously we're going to recap the Steelers win. We're at the quarter-way point, or sort of the quarter-way point, with 17 games now. We'll throw the fifth game on the back end, and we'll give you a quarterly update on some of the rookies, some guys that we like in particular. We're going to do an injury report. Jets are looking a little light on the injury report, which is a good thing, and that'll take us right into the Dolphins preview, and we'll give you some draft talk at the end, obviously, to close it out here. So with the Week 4 recap, offensively, I want to start with Zach Wilson, his return to football. He came out kind of a rocky start. I know he had some good plays in the first half, but he finished 18 of 36, 252 yards, which is his third most yardage output in his career. 297 at Tennessee last year, Week 4, and then 258 at Carolina last year was his second. So he was just right there as his third most yardage output. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, but he did have the receiving touchdown on the New York special, we'll call it. There were some other names on Twitter that I liked better, but we won't use them here on the show. Wilson and Moore, that was my first highlight. I think just like last year, that connection was crisp. It was sharp. A lot of good anticipation throws on third down that really helped continue drives. And I think Elijah Moore got a little frustrated down the stretch that he wasn't getting as many looks as he should have. I think he finished with 4 targets. But in the first half, they were clicking. And I wrote, as always, because last year it was kind of the same thing toward the back end of the season. I think the Philly game was when they really started to break out together. So I like that was an instant pickup right away. He did have the ugly first half interception when they were in field goal range, could have put points on the board. He had the deflected interception, not his fault, Tyler Conklin's fault. Minkah Fitzpatrick intercepted it. I feel like Minkah Fitzpatrick is due for an interception anytime the ball is tipped up in the air. So that was a really unfortunate one. A couple misses on Zach's part, easy misses. Again, these screens, these swings, the rail route to Breece Hall. I think twice he missed Breece Hall that could have been touchdowns. So,
that deep ball to Breece Hall was the worst one to me. That would have been like a 91-yard touchdown pass.
He was
nobody behind him, and he's under. That would have been huge.
That was the killer to me. Yep. Corey Davis. I think we need to talk about him a lot because that connection looked really good. He targeted Corey Davis on 4 out of his 5 catches were on the final 2 drives. So when it was time to nut up, he was looking for Corey Davis. Corey Davis finished with the 3rd most wide receiver snaps behind Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson, but he had the 1st most targets in 7. So I think that's for those who play fantasy football and they had the big boom in Garrett Wilson early. I think Corey Davis is the name to watch. He might be on the free agent wire, honestly, in some leagues because he didn't produce early. But I think he's the one to watch with Zach Wilson because that connection did look very good. Yeah, like I said, he missed Breece Hall on a couple of those routes, so it would have put his yards total, like epic day, like over 300 yards. He would have looked great in the stat sheet. But then my final note on Zach Wilson specifically was he is so fun yet stressful to watch. Every single play, my heart was pounding out of its chest. Some plays were great, some plays not so great, like the throwback pass for Michael Carter that ended in a goof throwaway. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on that because I know Austin Gale had a tweet related to beer pong or something, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how you felt if you were stressed watching Zach Wilson in the pocket a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, honestly, it's more stressful when he starts running out of the pocket, when he gets under pressure. And I mean, the pressure numbers were insane.
Yeah.
I think the official stat was 22 pressures in one game. That's absolutely nuts. And that, the play on the trick play behind the line of scrimmage, like it was a disaster, but then it was a thing of beauty. Like to see him gather the ball well enough to just take a couple of strides and have the wherewithal and the ability to just flip it forward. Like that's those are the types of plays, honestly, I watch, and it's it's just from so many years of just terrible Jets football. I watch that play and I'm like, that play 99 times out of 100 happens against the Jets.
Oh, like, yeah, for sure.
The Jets they're always that team that, like, even when they do something kind of right, it finds a way to go wrong. And that's what happened. I mean, again, not that Pittsburgh had to do anything to force that. That was a Jets mistake. Right. But in years past, that is 100% a Jets fumble, whatever, the other team picks it up. So yeah, it was the best terrible play you'll ever see.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair way to put it. And some of the plays, I think, were smaller versions of that throughout the day. And obviously there was the deep pass to Corey Davis that he couldn't get his feet in on the sidelines. And those plays look great. He's dropping back 12 yards behind the line of scrimmage, looking like it's going to be a big loss of a play. And he just lobs it up. It's a perfect ball to Corey Davis, and he just couldn't get that second foot inbound. So there was a lot of good, a lot of bad.
Did you see that replay though?
It was questionable. Yeah. I
don't even think it was questionable. First I thought this is just a Jets fan looking to complain. He was out of bounds. Sure. No question in my mind. But if you watch the replay, he was very clearly in. Mm-hmm. And the reason why, we're all looking at Corey Davis's toe and we're watching it land on the line. And you're like, look, he's out of bounds. But if you drag that bar back a little bit, his right foot is on the ground planted. His right foot, there's no question. The left foot, the toe that lands out of bounds, that's a third touch. It kicks up chalk on the hash mark with that left foot. So the left foot kicked up chalk, the right foot was in bounds, and then the left foot landed on the line, and that's what they called. And, watching it real time, it happened so quickly. Yeah. I thought to myself, I'm not going to say I was screaming for a replay, but I just thought, oh, wow, that was really close. Mm-hmm. And then I see the tweet, oh, Corey Davis was in bounds. And I'm thinking, oh, here's another whining fan complaining. Who cares?
Yeah.
And then I saw enough people talking about it that I thought, let me watch this thing. And I watched it. And the first couple times I'm like, oh, he cut the clip off before his toe landed out of bounds. He's doing that because he's out. And then I'm like, oh, no, he kicks up chalk with that lip. He was in bounds.
Damn. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to go back and rewatch that now and focus specifically on that. It seemed like
I'll look for it. It's on the I'll send it to you. It's on the forums on JetNation. Someone shared that tweet, and I went, same thing on there. People were like, "Why are you complaining? He's out of bounds. What's the big deal?" And I said, "Look, guys, I thought the same thing. But if you watch that foot, you see it kick up chalk with the right foot down."
Wow, that's funny because I saw a lot of Pittsburgh fans, not to completely get off the rails, but I saw a lot of Pittsburgh fans complaining about the Minkah Fitzpatrick would-be interception on the sideline.
And that was close.
Yeah, I think his feet were in bounds, but I think the ball was not secured at the time his feet were in bounds, and his foot came up as the secure
That's exact.
happened.
That I
So I
think
saw a
I
lot.
think it was his right foot started coming up before he had the ball secured. That's what I thought.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of people griping about that one. I have to go back and watch the Corey one, but that's interesting. Moving on to the running backs, I want to touch on this. For the second week in a row, Breece Hall has more snaps and obviously more snap percentage than Michael Carter. This week, 17 carries for 66 yards and a touchdown for Breece Hall, just a little bit short. Michael Carter had 9 for 15. Pretty rough day for him. But the snap count was 31 for Michael Carter, 46 for Breece Hall. So it was a 65-45 split in Hall's favor. This is the second week in a row now that Breece Hall has gotten more snap percentage than Michael Carter. Last week was 51-48, so a little bit closer to 50-50. But I wanted to ask you, after rewatching, I'm not sure how much of the rewatch you got done, but is Breece Hall running back one from here on out? Is Michael Carter going to be our backup?
I mean, listen, I said after they drafted him that it would only be a matter of time before he's RB1. He should be RB1. And yeah, I hope that's the point there right now. He's just clearly the most talented guy. I just sent you that shot if you get a second to look at it. But
Oh, perfect.
yeah, I think Breece Hall, he's the more talented runner. He's more explosive. He's more powerful. And he really, he's had a couple of runs now where you're like, man, he is like literally like that close to just, popping that big 50, 60, 70 yarder, which of course he didn't break this week because I bet money that he would.
That's why I said just a little close. And yeah, I'm looking at this replay and I'm glad that it's looping because it's really easy to tell. His foot was down.
Stare at that toe when it comes across the hash.
Yep, I 100% agree. It flicked up. Yep, I see it. Oh,
yep.
Man, could you imagine?
The first couple times I didn't. I was like, oh, I can't believe these people are complaining. He's obviously out. And then I was like, oh, he kicked up chalk.
That's amazing. If Zach completed that pass, I think every national media outlet is raving about Zach. I think that one play could have made the difference because it was a beautiful play. I thought at least, but yeah. So that's interesting. I'm glad that you said that about Breece Hall because when he was drafted, I kind of said the same thing that it's only a matter of time. If you just look at his workload at Iowa State, he's just getting the workload. He was the guy. He was like almost like a Jonathan Taylor type of workload when he was at Wisconsin. So
right.
So it's just I'm glad that we see it. I think he had a couple big runs. I think explosive to Rob Sala's 12 yards, and I think he had a couple of those in this game. But he's so close to breaking that 50, 60, 70-yard run, and you can see these lanes are opening up in the rushing attack, and I'm really happy. I think Nate Herbig stepped up big. Especially in pass pro, there was only one sack allowed.
Herbig's a solid player, man. That was a big signing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have to talk about it now. We can transition right to the offensive line. AVT, 60% of the offensive line covered by one man. It's insane. And who knows the way that this offensive tackle position is shaken out this season? He could play right tackle. What happens if Dwayne Brown's healthy and they like what Herbig did at right guard? Could you throw an AVT at right tackle? Could you see a scenario of that? He already said he's willing to try.
He said he would do it. I said after the game that, I'm glad it happened because I've had this conversation with people. I've had people get really upset with me for suggesting that they move a guy, out of desperation in season. Joe Thomas says it's hard and he's the best ever. And how dare you? And I'm like, look, I'm talking desperate times, desperate measures, right? I actually messaged a good friend of mine who I go back and forth with quite a bit on the Jets. And I said to him, listen, this part I mentioned after the show, if you go back to the year they drafted AVT, if you go back to the shows I did leading up to that, I was saying they need to draft a guard who has like legitimate, obviously you're not going to get like all pro level. But I said, you got to draft a guard who can legitimately step in and play tackle for a couple weeks if you need him to, because you don't know what you're getting with Becton here. And I messaged a friend of mine the other day, and I said, look, when AVT was drafted, my thought process was he can play left tackle in a pinch, and if things get really ugly. I said, this is about as ugly as it gets. And I said, I don't know if you move him there because you've moved him from left guard to right guard. You then move him to tackle. But my thought process was, when this guy was drafted, my first reaction was great. They got a guy who they can plug in at left tackle if they have to.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm not going to sit here and say I 100% thought they would, I like I said, I was messaging somebody saying, if I'm the Jets, I consider left tackle for AVT. Don't know if it's the best idea because of all the moves, but when you drafted him, you drafted a guy who you were going to plug in at guard, who could play left tackle in a pinch. And this is, I mean, you're literally down to your fifth tackle at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And personally, I'm glad that Robert Saleh kept that from the media. I know that's obviously their game planning, so they're not going to divulge that information. But I'm really glad to see that he held up. I do agree with that. If you are going to go and draft a guard, especially high up, they traded up and traded the 23rd pick and 2/3 to go get him at 14. So if you're going to trade all that for a guard, especially, you're going to need him to get you out of a game at tackle. And I think AVT did more than that. I also think if you're going to draft a guard in maybe the day 2 range, you want him either to get you out of a game at tackle or center. I think you have to be able to go one of the two because that's just super important. Not many teams carry a true backup center. I don't think the Jets have one currently. I know Dan Feeney's the backup center.
I was going to say Feeney's got a lot of reps at center in the NFL.
Yeah, he's got a ton of reps, but he's got guard and center.
Yes. You don't see a lot of true centers, no.
Exactly. I think what's the guy from Philly that we like, Cam Jurgens. He might be the only true center backup.
But that's the guy who, you're drafting. You're grooming him to be your starter. That's why he's the backup.
And Jason Kelsey's doing a damn good job.
Exactly.
But so I'm more than happy with the performance from the offensive line. I think it was 1 sack allowed, but I don't even know if it was allowed by someone specific because Zach moved up in the pocket. Alex Highsmith came around Max Mitchell and sacked him. It was like the first or second drive of the game. So to see 1 sack early and then obviously Zach evading the rush was.
I was going to say that was a lot on Zach.
It's the Zach Wilson effect, absolutely.
I mean, I think they lose that game 31-0 if it's Joe Flacco and 100%. Connor McDermott in the lineup.
Oh yeah, they're pinning their ears back. They're running right at Joe Flacco, knowing he's not moving off the spot. But I think that the Zach Wilson effect is going to not make up over the blemishes of the offensive line, but they're going to work together way more than Flacco and the offensive line did. And I think that was a good start of it. One thing I did want to mention about Zach real quick while we were mentioning it, it's more offensive schemes. I saw a lot of RPOs with Zach. And I think obviously Joe Flacco is not going to run those RPO schemes because he's not the mobile type. But Zach Wilson was really able to get himself out of the pocket on these RPOs and then look downfield. But then he was also able to hold the long handoffs with the running back and find Tyler Conklin over the middle. And I thought that was the impressive stuff. Obviously, Mike LaFleur, we got to give him his flowers because it was a great offensive game. But I thought the RPO game specifically was a nice little wrinkle for Zach Wilson that we didn't see with Joe Flacco. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how you think this offense is going to evolve a little bit with Zach now under center.
Yeah, I noticed that. I want to say a week or two ago, I think it's Wake Forest runs a lot of that that slow, delayed RPO stuff.
Yep.
And you don't see as much of that as I think you're going to, and as we move forward. And as the Jets were running it, I was like, oh, that's what I saw Wake Forest doing a ton of a couple of weeks ago, and it works well. And actually saw was it Dan Orlovsky on ESPN talking about it? I think it was Marcus Spears. I'm not sure. And Spears is talking about how when you do that delayed stuff, when the quarterback can hide the ball and hold on to that last second, it really does slow the linebackers up because they have to stay home. It was great to see. It was it was one more weapon, and I meant to. It's one of those things that that's the thing. We do the show, and I probably spend 1 million hours a week thinking about what to bring up on the show, and then you don't get to all of it. But that was, I mean, it's no big. Obviously, everybody was thinking about Zach Wilson being able to escape pressure more than Joe Flacco. But I wanted to touch a little bit on, the ability to sort of just open up the playbook and design stuff for him to move more than Joe Flacco can. So it was nice to see that. It was nice to see the RPOs. And it's one of those things, man. I love the fact that Zach can run. And to be fair, I said the same thing with Darnold early on before we knew he was going to be terrible. Is that I love the fact that he can run, but I'm pulling my hair out when he does. I'm like, get down. Like, I just don't want the guy to get hurt, You got to obviously he's got to play the game, and that's just the fan in me, But you realize as a competitor, that's what he's going to do. So the fact that he can take off, the fact that he can escape pressure, the fact that you can design more plays, more RPOs, and give him time to sort of like we said, hold the linebackers in place, and it's it's exciting. I'm trying not to get too worked up, but I'm watching.
Right.
Listen, I'm watching. I didn't get second week in a row. I didn't get to all of the all 22, but I got enough of it that I'm seeing the Elijah Moore separation. I'm seeing the Garrett Wilson separation. I'm seeing Corey Davis make a ton of catches. I know what Tyler Conklin can do, and I'm just like, if this kid gets it together, like sky's the limit.
Special.
It really at this point it's about the O-line getting it together. Zach's got his issues. You mentioned earlier we saw a swing and a screen that just way off target. A little bit concerning because it carries over from last year, even though he cleaned it up late in the season. But there's enough talent here, man. It's this, and I'm not trying to like be hyperbolic, but I think back my time as a fan when I first started watching the Jets. They were pretty good back then offensively. Like they've had some good offensive teams since then, but back in the late 80s, like they had like legitimate guys who were in place for a long time. Right. Not like these flash in the pan, like like the Decker and Marshall year, or right. With when they were decent with Sanchez because they had like a bunch of all-pro linemen, free agents late in their career, like young dynamic playmakers. This could be the best. This should be the best group I've ever seen in my life as a fan. I think back to Wesley Walker, Al Toon, Freeman McNeil, Ken O'Brien. Like that was a really good group. They could score points. But these guys are like babies. These guys are in their infancy with Zach and Moore and Wilson. And Corey Davis isn't even that old. He's only in his 5th or 6th year.
Yep.
And I don't know when you want to talk about Corey Davis, but we need to talk about Corey Davis.
Oh, no, we're definitely going to talk about Corey Davis. And I don't know if you caught his press conference. I think it was yesterday. But he talked about blocking. And it's how he is just A1 willing to block no matter what. He's ready to put his head down and just bury the defender. He's like, I'm ready to lay out for my boys, essentially. And that's the type of mentality you need from your biggest wide receiver. If you're going to play as many snaps as he has, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 type snaps on the team, you're definitely going to need to show up on run plays, not just the pass plays. JT O'Sullivan actually did a breakdown of Zach Wilson, and he highlighted the interception play and a lack of effort by Elijah Moore on his route to the bottom of the screen where the throw was made. And I don't necessarily think I see that from Corey Davis ever. I think even on the run plays, he pops off the film, so to speak. When I go back and watch the all 22 and he's on the field, sometimes they have him in those condensed splits. I know LaFleur likes to run the condensed stuff, and he's like right behind the tight end or the tackle. I don't get scared. They put Braxton Berrios there. I don't like the play already, So Corey Davis gives me that calming feeling both in the pass and the run. I know he's had his miscues and his drops, and I know you mentioned it on the recap that after his first drop this season, he has been lights out. He has not had another drop or maybe one drop since. So he's killing it. I know you have more to add, but he looked phenomenal, in my opinion, on Sunday. 73 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, it's just another example of how overreactionary we are as fans. Like people were really going crazy. And even if even if you want to kill Corey Davis I think he had 4 drops last season. You would have thought he had 15 by the way people talk about him. And listen, I get it. And I've said it. Like, I look back at some old tweets and I said it and I still stand by it. Like, well, look, it's like, dude, you're making enough money that you should be making the difficult catches. Like, not every catch is going to be easy. But he's still a human being. And some of those, like, at least one of those drops, I remember it well. It was just overthrown over his head. He's like reaching out, his fingertips barely graze it. And we're calling that a drop.
Right.
And if you just look at his history, look at his time in Tennessee, every single year he got better, catching a higher percentage of his targets. His drops were low. His fumbles were low. That's why I spent all offseason saying, like, this is a fluke. It's an aberration. And fans were still like, oh, he had that drop in week 1, and that was the turning point of the game, and he sucks, and he can't catch a ball in the close game. Like, are you going to tell me every ball he caught in Tennessee was a blowout?
Right,
like 77 catches, every one of them happened down by 50. Like, the guy is a good football player.
Yep.
People need to realize that these guys have stretches. You know, they go 5, 6, 7 games where they don't play well for whatever reason. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying you don't trash a guy who's proven he can play in this league, who's an ascending player, because he had a bad stretch. And Corey Davis right now, he has made some fantastic catches in this offense. He's taking hits going over the middle and hold on. That ball he had the other day where he had to slide on the turf, you know, he's hitting the deck, and Zach put it in a good spot where only he could get it. But it's still a really tough catch, and he makes it.
The fourth down catch, reaching out. Oh,
yeah, man. I understand he hasn't been perfect, and it's frustrating, but people have talked about this guy like he's just garbage, and like, oh, Corey Davis, oh, Mr. Drops, Mr. Fumbles. Like, no, like, good player who had a few bad games. Like, that's what he is.
Right.
And now I'm so happy for him.
Yeah.
And as is always the case, all the people who are ripping him and trashing him now they're all quiet. Now they love him. Love Corey. I always loved Corey Davis. Yep. Look, he's a really good player, and the blocking that you mentioned, you know, when he signed from Tennessee, and I went back and watched some of those games, there were some big runs where you saw him just burying corners. And like, it is such an underrated aspect. I mean, listen, my thought process is nowadays, especially with, like, you know, I mean, obviously you're a younger guy, but you watch the whole game. But like, for like the fantasy football crowd, if it doesn't get fantasy football points, it's not important.
They're irrelevant. Yep.
Oh, pressures don't matter because I don't get points for that on my fantasy team. Right. Oh, I don't care if he blocks somebody. I don't get any points for that on my fantasy team.
Right.
It's all about yards and touchdowns, and if you're not getting those, nothing. And if you're doing something other than that, who cares?
Yeah.
Oh, you suck. I don't care if you block somebody. You didn't score 3 touchdowns. But really, you know, listen. When was the last time you saw an NFL head coach talk about fantasy football like it mattered? Like, they laugh at it. You know, on the rare occasion it comes up, they're like, "What? I'm a football coach."
Yeah,
like,
Arthur Smith.
I worry about things that really happen in real life.
2 weeks ago. Sorry, I was gonna say 2 weeks ago, Arthur Smith had a game. He didn't target Kyle Pitts once in the game plan, and people asked him at the podium, "Why aren't you targeting your best player?" Obviously, you should, but he's like, "I'm not here to win fantasy matchups. I'm here to win football games." I'm like, "All right. I mean, I get it, but like, that's Kyle Pitts over there, dude." So,
did they win the game though?
No, I don't think they did. But they rushed for like 200 something yards, and he was hanging his hat on that. So
yeah, but that's the thing. Like, that is a good question. Like, why are you throwing Kyle Pitts the ball? But but the number of times that I see, you know, and actually this is one topic I wanted to cover, and I don't know how much time we have for it, but you know, fans don't like to hear about pressures. Well, because pressures aren't sacks, and I don't get fantasy points for that. But this might be another. I mean, honestly, this is like, I think this could be a longer conversation, maybe an article later. But you know, we talk about pressures and Lawson, and we saw it with Leonard Williams, and we hear about it. And the more I watched, you know, today's game, not that pressures aren't important, but I feel like, are they less important? Because nowadays, guys make throws on the run routinely that guys never made. Like guys like Lamar and Patrick Mahomes. I mean, Zach Wilson, there's tons of guys who make throws on the run that years ago would be like the play of the week. And now you see that play a dozen times a Sunday. And it's almost, so I'm not saying pressures don't matter, but pressures don't impact the way they used to, because quarterbacks are so much more athletic and able to make plays even if you get them off their spot. So it was just a thought I had, you know. I'm thinking about Lawson. Like, Rich Cimini sent out a stat that Carl Lawson is actually like top 10 in the NFL in pressures.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, Jesus, it sure doesn't feel like it. And opposing quarterbacks don't seem to be having a tough time.
No, and I think the quality of the pressures is that gray area with pressures as a whole, because with the Jets specifically, they've been up there in terms of pressure. They're, I think, top half of the league. They're not in the basement, but a lot of times, especially with Carl Lawson, you're seeing him pinch the offensive line down, and nobody's looping around. That means the quarterback, you know, you're facing mobile quarterbacks. Everybody that they face is mobile. Mitch Trubisky might be the least mobile, and he's a very mobile quarterback, in my opinion. So he can get out of the pocket very easily. There's no contain there, so you can get all the pressures you want. If they're not the quality pressures that you have to really go in and dive deep and see how these pressures are being created, because like
they've got to be quick. They've got to be like under a second. Like, those are the ones that matter. If guys have a second to step back and see you coming and they can evade you, it almost doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you said, they're just getting more mobile at this point. So that's not going to be
funny you said that, because because as I was thinking of this, that was my thought process was they almost have to have multiple categories of pressures. Like how many pressures happened in under a second and a half,
Yes.
and how many happened in 2.5, 3 seconds.
Time to
Sometimes you see
pressure.
a guy, he sits back, and eventually it's like a coverage pressure. Like eventually a guy breaks through and chases the quarterback out of the pocket. But it's like, he's already had 3 seconds to look, and now he makes a throw on the run. Like, is that really an impactful pressure? Versus you get in there right away and you blow up the play basically because the quarterback has to move off a spot right away. So that was my thought. Like, it's almost like they've got to have sacks and like multiple levels of pressures, because some pressures don't seem to really have all that much impact nowadays.
Yeah, I think, and offensively, a lot of analytics look at time to throw for quarterbacks.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
And that's like 2.5, 2.6 seconds if you're
That's
on the good end.
2.5 is the standard.
Exactly. Every pressure under 2.5 or 1.5 or, under a second. Yeah, there needs to be tiers of these pressures, because it's easy to say, oh, the Jets had X amount of pressures against the Steelers, but that doesn't mean anything. Here, I'm looking it up on PFF right now, how many total pressures. They had 13 total pressures. If you told me what you told me earlier about Zach Wilson and the 23 versus 13, I don't disagree, because the quality of their pressures were way more significant than our 13. If our 13 were of quality pressure, we definitely could have affected that game a lot more. But the pass rush is getting there, and I think they're starting to. They're not even close to what I think they could be yet, or what I think you think they could be yet. But yeah, it's tough because they had a good game, and you look back and it's like, well, he's still able to make plays off the pressure. So is it really a good thing or not?
Yeah, and that's what makes this week interesting, is that Teddy Bridgewater is probably the least mobile quarterback they faced up to this point.
Yeah.
So how do they do? But he's a veteran guy, and again, that's another thing. The blitzes. We talked about it because with it being Robert Saleh's preference, rush 4, because the great quarterbacks can beat the blitzes, and I feel like there are a lot of guys who can do that. A lot of these vets, they almost want you to blitz them. Like, go ahead, bring extra bodies, because that's going to make it easier for me to find a guy in man coverage to make a play. So Teddy Bridgewater is he might be I don't have the list in front of me. He might be the best backup in the league. Like, he's better than some starters. There's not a lot of backup quarterbacks better than Teddy Bridgewater. What's that?
Better than Joe Flacco?
Ooh, I don't know about that.
We might have the best backup in the league.
Flacco and Teddy Bridgewater might be the only two guys left in the league who can't escape pressure.
Oh, that's 100% true. Yeah, that's bad.
That's the thing. Everybody can. Everybody.
You mentioned.
I watch these college quarterbacks, and I'm like, "Ooh, this guy can move," and then I'm like, "Everybody can move." It's 2022.
Yeah.
Dan Marino, Ken O'Brien, whatever. All these it's a different
Tom
era.
Brady.
Even 10 years ago, like, guys who can't move anymore don't play quarterback. It's very rare. Like, you better be Dan Marino.
Exactly. You better have it up here if you're gonna not be the mobile type. Exactly. You mentioned blitz percentage, or how much they were blitzing. I saw a stat in a preview video that they blitzed week 4 6.9% of the time. So they're not blitzing nearly as much as I'm not saying they should, but they're not sending the house as much as people think. So maybe 13 pressures isn't that bad. Obviously, I haven't gone back and looked at every single one, but when you're blitzing at that low rate, I know Miami, and we'll get into it, they blitzed at a 33.3% rate against Joe Burrow on Thursday Night Football last week. So you're looking at polar opposites in terms of pressures and how they're going to send it. So I think that's interesting. We got to touch on the defense. Obviously, we're here talking about pass rush, but that back end of the defense, 4 interceptions, LaMarcus Joyner breakout game. I tweeted that after his first pick, because it came after the PBU on George Pickens. I said, is this a LaMarcus Joyner breakout game? I was like stunned that I was even tweeting that.
Early on, that ball that he broke up, I mean, I
think that was almost more impressive than things he did with the
Have they announced Defensive Player of the Week? I can't imagine he wouldn't win it.
They just announced the rookie Pepsi Sugar
Zero. That's the which fans vote most on Twitter.
Exactly. Yeah. They didn't announce the big.
I don't get excited about that. All it means is more Jets fans vote, which is nice. That's fine, whatever. But it's not. Give me something voted on not by who has the most fans, who have the time to go on Twitter and vote.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, he had 2 picks. Whitehead had another pick, and then Michael Carter II had a really nice carom interception.
And even on the Whitehead pick, that was a Joyner deflection.
Yeah. And he was like all the way
like
back with
contorted,
his,
like the
like
ball was behind him, and he
I
reached
think
back. It was
his
a
pass
beautiful play.
breakups,
Beautiful play.
were better than his interceptions. I know he had the one where he scooped it off the ground, but he
Yeah,
caused all the
that might be the
interceptions.
best game we've seen by a safety in years.
Oh yeah, especially a
Even
Jets
even when
safety.
Jamal Adams was here, and Jamal
Yeah,
Adams is a good blitzer. That was, he couldn't cover anybody.
right.
You know, plays and coverage were not his thing.
Yep.
So yeah, in terms of playing in coverage, that's. I mean, it's funny because it was against the Steelers, and he ended up not being a very good player. But Jaquan Jarrett won Defensive Player of the Week when he had 2 picks against the Steelers for
I was at
reps.
that game.
Yeah. Oh, were you really? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
We
that was.
had Michael Vick. We had Vick,
I'm trying
right?
to think. I'm trying to think who the starter was, because somebody got benched for something, and that's why Jaquan Jarrett was starting.
I don't
I'm getting
remember
old.
either. He had forced fumbles and 2 picks. It was
Yeah.
amazing. Yep.
Yeah. I'm getting old. I can't remember, but somebody got benched. And Jaquan Jarrett got the start, and he got 2 picks, and he won Defensive Player of the Week. And I feel like Joyner, I feel like he's got a shot, man. Like,
Oh yeah.
I think he had 4 deflections, one of them was intercepted, and 2 interceptions of his own. I mean, come on.
And his running mate, Jordan Whitehead, he had the 1 interception, but if not for Carl Lawson's boneheaded roughing the passer at the end of the half, he would have had a second one technically. And
am I crazy, or should the refs have been blowing the whistle on that play? Why is that play carrying on, and they're running 50, 60 yards down the field returning it?
Right.
And the refs are just waiting for them to stop, and then they're like, oh, it's a penalty.
My assumption would be, because the ball would still be live, that if something happened and the Steelers picked it up and advanced it, maybe. But like, I don't know. It seems really silly that an untimed down did all that, and then
I just feel like if somebody had blown out an ACL trying to tackle somebody,
you wouldn't hear the end of it.
What's that?
You wouldn't have heard the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure it's funny. It's one of those things where, every now and then you're like, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm watching it, and I'm like, why isn't there a whistle? Like, and I'm just, because that play took a while. I had a few times. I'm like, where's the whistle? Where's the whistle? Why are they? And then if you go back and watch it, as the player was pushed out of bounds, you could hear someone on the Steelers sideline say something along the like, blow the goddamn whistle, or something like that. And I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, if there was a flag earlier in the play and the return doesn't matter, but I don't know. Maybe that's why. Maybe if the Jets fumble it and Pittsburgh picks it up and they advance, I don't know. But I just felt like for a play where there was a flag sort of 15 seconds earlier, why are guys still running down the field, lateraling and trying to tackle and risking injury?
Yep. And I was at a Steelers fan's house watching this game, and I saw Martin and Lawson coming off the edge, and it went off screen because the pass went up in the air. I said, oh, just wait. Yellow flag, roughing on 58. And I walked out of the room, and I came back as they were announcing it, and I looked at all their faces. They were stunned. They're like, how did you know? I was like, because it's the Jets. Like, anytime something like that happens and you rush one with 2 late, you're going to hit him late. Jacob Martin did a great job pulling back. He actually got hit by Carl Lawson because he hit Trubisky so damn hard. But like, luckily they were able to overcome the bonehead mistake. It was one of the only ones. I think there was a late hit on CJ Mosley that was very ticky-tack that didn't really interrupt the game. But the boneheaded mistakes were to a minimum, and I think that was the first step in getting a quality win. Like, we had boneheaded mistakes in every game, including the Cleveland win. So that was a good thing to see, minimal mistakes there. I wanted to talk about Quan Alexander because he stepped in for Quincy Williams and he balled out. He was knocking people's heads off. I think he played 91% of the snaps. So it was literally just him and CJ Mosley in the middle. I know they sprinkled in Marcel Harris when they went to their 4-3, but did you have any thoughts specifically about Quan Alexander and CJ Mosley? I actually see somebody commented about CJ Mosley in the comments here. I'll put it up. That linebacker coverage on tight ends has been poor. I personally don't think Mosley has been horrible. I would argue that he's been the exact opposite. Maybe in pass coverage, he has had his moments, but when it comes to the run game, CJ Mosley is absolutely doing what is necessary and needed to just break up rush lanes and let that Quan Alexander guy scrape over him and come and make the play. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the linebacker play based off this question.
Yeah, I know. I feel like there was a stretch where they targeted Mosley a few times and he gave up some catches. And that was a concern. When they signed him, to that huge contract, I remember, going back and thinking, that this guy doesn't cover well enough to justify that type of money. And then, of course, he misses a full season, and then the COVID season. And then last year, everybody was – I always have a hard time really rating players when the entire unit is a mess, because it's almost like Is it the player, or is it just the defense is a disaster? So I thought this year would be, a better opportunity to get a feel for how good he is in coverage. I don't think he's as bad as I initially feared, but I do feel, like the other day, I think he got picked on a little bit, and I was going to mention that as something to watch moving forward. Like, our team's going to look at that and go, oh, look, they had success finding those one-on-one matchups with Mosley and targeting him. So I think teams are going to sort of look at that going forward. Quan Alexander, listen, I'm gonna learn a lesson here from the George Fant situation. I said it, a lot of us said it, but we were sort of adamant, like, when George Fant got flipped again, it was like, sign him now, give him an extension. He's such an important piece. And then now he's hurt again, and he's been hurt in the past. And I look at Quan Alexander, the way he's playing, I'm like, give that dude a 3-year deal now before he has a monster season and the price quadruples.
Absolutely.
But then there's a part of me that goes, he has missed significant time with injuries. Maybe let him prove he can play through the full season and re-sign him. But he's a guy that, I mean, if he keeps playing the way he is, he just comes up with these monster hits. He's a veteran guy, covers a lot of ground. And I think that I think he'll be, I think the Jets will sort of target him as a guy to extend if he continues playing this way. It has been a treat to watch because, as I've said before, there were a lot of people with the Jets with their lack of depth at linebacker who were saying, like, oh, at least sign Quan Alexander. Go get him. He's out there for weeks. And then the Jets finally go and get him, and it looks like it's paying off.
Yeah. To just specifically, answer the viewer's question, I looked it up on PFF real quick. CJ Mosley and Quan Alexander together in coverage, it looks like they allowed 6 receptions on 7 targets for 70 yards and 1 pass deflection by CJ Mosley. So not great. CJ Mosley also had 2 missed tackles. Quan Alexander did not have any. I don't know if those missed tackles came in the pass game in coverage or not, but you don't really like to see them letting up 75+% completion percentage over the middle. We'll get into Miami, and that's where
it is tough. I think it's tough though, because I remember a few years ago,
defender. So
I think and not only that, I think it was one of the Darren Lee years when his numbers were bad, and I started looking, like, comparing him to other linebackers around the league, and even the best linebackers. Excuse me. The completion percentage is almost always like 10 out of 12, 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
And it's because it's these dumping off to these check down receivers. And to me, it's like, and you could even say, you could very easily say, this linebacker was targeted 7 times. He gave up 6 receptions for 84 yards. And then you go back and watch the game, and, like, he gives up 1 yard 5 different times. He's right on the guy, and then 1 big play, which still you don't want to see. But it really is so tough to say. But, getting back to Mosley, I did feel like there were a few plays in a row or in a short space of time where he was getting exposed a little bit and down the field a little. I'm not just talking about checkoffs and, check downs and dump offs right in front of the line of scrimmage. These were plays a little bit down the field. So it is something to watch because, again, copycat league. If teams saw it, the Dolphins are going to try it, and we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I think anytime you get CJ Mosley moving with depth, it's not always the best thing for him specifically. I think he's more of the east and west, sideline to sideline type tackler. So that's definitely one to monitor because I don't like him dropping back in those, like, Tampa 2 type coverages with the middle linebacker way deep. Not his game. It was back before the groin injury, and that's the problem. We saw it, and now it's not really there anymore, which is really unfortunate for him. Just for comparison, real quick, and we'll move on. Devin Bush and Miles Jack, the Steelers linebackers, allowed 5 of 9 for, I can't do math, 59 yards. So right there, they're basically a couple less completions, but more targets to them. So you basically what you said, linebackers are going to be targeted. Another player, we talked about Quan Alexander needing a new contract potentially, but we need to talk about number 95 and the new contract that he's going to command from this team. Are we going to have to start pulling out these calculators for Quinnen Williams to see where he's averaging in the league with top defensive tackles to pay this guy 17, 18 million? Or are you still on the fence of let's temper the salary, hopefully, and risk the game of maybe losing a Quinnen Williams?
I think, at some point in time, and fans have been saying this for a while, and they're right, at some point, the Jets have to start paying their own players. I mean, they don't have, they've not been it's not like they're this team that's just a juggernaut. And if you lose a guy, like, well, it's okay. Our other 8 starters are superstars anyway.
Mhm.
Like he's a centerpiece, but at the same time, we've seen enough times, where guys get big money and then they go, well, got my money. And all of a sudden that effort goes from 100% to maybe it's 74, 75% every week. So it worries you. And I can't blame Jets fans for that, but I also can't see letting a guy like Quinnen walk. I think the most interesting thing about him, and I've said this before, is that for the GM to pitch to ownership, because he's gonna want like top 3 money. He might want top 1 money.
Oh, yeah.
The
'Cause of
best free
age.
agent always wants to be the new highest paid guy at that position.
Right.
So explain to the owner, we're gonna pay this guy like he's the best D lineman in football, but we're gonna play him 25-30% less than the best D lineman in football plays. Like if I'm the owner, I want my money's worth. I don't want to feel like this guy's a part. He's basic to me. If you're not playing 70+%, like you're a part-time guy. And right now, Quinnen Williams is a very good, however, part-time player. And try telling me as an owner that you want to pay a part-time guy $18 million a year. Either his playing time needs to increase, or we need to reconsider how much money you're asking for.
Yeah, and he only had 39 out of 64 snaps, so I think it was like 61 or 62%, so right around where he's been. And I was hoping that after those comments with him and Ulbrich and whatnot, that they would ramp it up a little bit. But yeah, I think if you're going to pay somebody top dollar, you're going to have to play him more than 39 out of 64 snaps, especially in a win that he is dominating. He was winning his one-on-ones, even when other players were getting to the quarterback and affecting
He was phenomenal.
He was the one right there after
the sideline pursuit on Pickett a couple times for a guy that size.
Yeah.
Every play, even when I did go back to the portion of the all 22 I was able to watch, consistently double teamed and held.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're doubling you, and one dude is grabbing your jersey, and they still had a hard time controlling him. He's a monster right now, and this team is gonna, you can't screw. I don't think Joe Douglas is gonna screw this up. He's
no.
No.
I mean, you can only hope, but I don't think that they have that in them to really royally let this go down as one of the worst moves. And yeah, pay your guys. He's one of the longest tenured guys on the team. Now is the time.
And remember, I believe it was Rappaport or Schefter, one of them. I believe it was Rappaport who reported when Joe Douglas was first hired. I don't remember how immediate it was, but multiple teams, when Douglas was hired, they called him and they're like, hey, you want to trade Quinnen Williams? We'll take. And like they said, he turned down multiple ones for Quinnen Williams before he played his second season. So Joe Douglas knew from day one this was a guy worth building around.
Hell yeah.
So that's what gives me the impression, you expected him to be what he now is, so you keep him.
Yeah. And I saw this earlier on my timeline. I didn't realize that people were so heavy into mocks, but somebody on PFF put one out, and they had the Jets taking defensive tackle Jalen Carter, I think number 3 overall.
3 or 4.
4 overall, maybe, yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, even if they keep Quinnen, sure, they might want to beef up, but you got to start with locking up Quinnen for the long term. I mean, realistically, at the rate that contracts are going, you could pay him top 1 money in an offseason, and then by the next offseason, he's number 4. Maybe not for defensive tackle because at the defensive tackles don't get paid, but Foley Fadukasi just got $10 million a year. Quinnen Williams is going to need a lot more than maybe close to double that money by the time this season's over and they really start getting into contract talks with him. So that was just one that I think we need to monitor, and Joe Douglas is definitely going to monitor the salary cap when it pertains to 95.
Yeah.
Let's jump right in. We're obviously a little late on time here, but it's all right. Injury report. Never. No, not us. No. Injury report heading into week 5. I think the first thing I noticed when Saul was talking about injuries specifically, he's being very timid, and it's a good thing. At this point, your track record is shit, dude. Oh, excuse me, but it's bad. Like you can't be saying stuff about these players without the confirmation of the doctors and the cohesion that they need.
Everyone's day to day. Everyone, all 53 got day to
Just let
day.
them all. Everybody.
Practice squad guys day to day. Coaches are day to day. Everyone's day to day. Fans are day to day.
That one might be true. But all right, Max Mitchell, his knee, no timetable to return. Obviously, it looked bad. He was carted off the field. He was looking a little bummed. He wasn't crying, but he was a little bummed. We know it's not season ending. Obviously, IR is a possibility. I assume they're going to put him on IR. They have to at this point. He didn't practice today or yesterday. Same with Quincy Williams. He's dealing with his ankle. Again, IR might be a possibility for him. I think less likely than Max Mitchell, but still the possibility. Dwayne Brown, he's back. They opened up his 21-day window as well as Vinny Curry. So they have until the 26th of October to activate them to the 53-man roster, or else I think they have to put them on IR for the season. So
who goes if you activate Vinny Curry? That's my question.
I don't think at this point. I mean, Bryce Huff's been a healthy scratch 3 out of 4 games, so like you can't justify Vinny Curry now coming in and taking another spot. But Saleh did say he would dress 12 defensive linemen if he could. Not my words. That's a bad look. But Dwayne Brown,
Curry's gonna play safety then.
Oh God, let's not go there. Vinny Curry, Dwayne Brown opened up the 21-day window. Dwayne Brown looks like he could be ready to start, if not this week, next week. Based off all the signs that we're getting, he had a press conference and said that he did turn down surgery that would have ended his season in order to play this year. So something definitely to watch there, because his shoulder could give out at any minute, and that would put him on the shelf. Other injuries that are more week to week, Zach Wilson, I guess day-to-day ankle. He was limited yesterday. Samini tweeted that Ogunjobi fell on it during the touchdown pass to Corey Davis, and he was limping a little bit after. He was limited Wednesday, full Thursday, so he's good to go. Breece Hall was limited with a knee yesterday and today, but I'm sure he'll be full and ready to go. And Marcel Harris with a neck was limited in both days. I'm not sure how much of a factor he'll play unless they go into 4-3 base, but they also have other linebackers if need be. Any of those injuries stick out to you? I know you had some thoughts maybe about Dwayne Brown and when we could expect him back, in your opinion.
Yeah, it's funny. There were, 2 different reporters, and I forget the names because there's so many news.
Yeah, they change every year.
Beat. There was the guy at the Daily News. I forget his name. And then I forget who the other guy writes for, but one of them was like, based on what I'm hearing, I expect him to play this week. And the other guy was like, oh, from what I'm hearing, I'd be surprised if he plays this week.
Yeah.
Are you talking to different people? Do your ears work differently? Like, what the hell's going on here? But I don't know. I'm naturally pessimistic with this team, even more so with injuries because of what's happened of late. Mm-hmm. So until I see Dwayne Brown lined up at tackle when they snap the ball, I will assume he is out. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming similar to last week, AVT and Herbig. If Dwayne Brown is in there, great. But let's not forget, he just had a shoulder injury that was bad enough that they said surgery was an option. He said no. Would anyone be surprised if he leaves after the first series holding his shoulder and it's the last we see of him? This is what 34 years of this team does to you. It's what I expect.
Yeah, and it's a sad reality.
He plays great. I hope he wins. I hope he makes the damn. I hope he's an All-Pro.
Yeah, I hope he and AVT.
A left tackle who is injured and needed or could have had surgery and chose not to. Yeah. And so now we wait and see if he should have had surgery or not.
Every single snap, he's going to have, pressure and penetration on that shoulder. I don't know which one it is. I just pointed to my right, but every single snap. So it doesn't matter, run, pass, whatever. He's going to have to make contact. It's going to wear on him throughout the year. I'm just hoping that him and AVT come in and be the best tackle duo this team has seen in a long time, personally. Yeah. All right, we need to jump ahead here. We're going to wrap that up, and I guess we'll just jump into the Dolphins. We'll kick off. Yeah. We'll talk about rookies next week.
Yeah, sure. Right. Well, we can push rookies back because again, with the 17,
the weird week, yeah.
Yeah. The Dolphins. Look, the big thing to me is their receivers, and I think for anyone who faces them with Tyreek Hill and Waddle, they're explosive guys. And, you and I both, I think we mentioned this at the end of last week's show, or it might have been the chat we had after the show, that Sauce Gardner against these guys is going to be interesting because Gardner himself said the Calvin Austin thing.
Yep.
For those of you not familiar, Calvin Austin, shorter, quicker, speed guy out of Memphis. Sauce Gardner said that was the toughest guy he had to cover in his time in college. These guys are thicker, stronger pros, so they'll be, much tougher covers than Austin was. So it's going to be, I think really, Sauce Gardner is already at a point after just a few games where he's going to be matched up against the other team's top guy, and it's always going to be fun to watch. So we'll see how he does. We'll see if the safeties, kind of continue what they did last week against these guys. And the big thing to me is going to be how well does Teddy Bridgewater play, is his first start off the bench. He's a veteran, but you have to imagine there's still going to be some rust there. And if this Jets pass rush, as I mentioned earlier, Teddy, one of the least mobile guys in the league, are they able to take advantage of that and get themselves some sacks?
Yeah, I feel like I've been a bit redundant this year so far with my weekly game plan previews and highlighting Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Sometimes just Sauce, sometimes both corners. But this game I highlighted this game I highlighted both corners. I said this is their toughest test from a skill set standpoint because nothing that they've gone up against this year has been close. I think Deontay Johnson might be like one of the smaller receivers that they've faced all year, and he's not even that small, and he's a slot guy. So those guys aren't going to see him on the perimeter. So when you have small guys on the perimeter that have speed, it's going to be a potential mismatch opportunity in favor of the Dolphins. I have from PFF here, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle when targeted in the intermediate center of the field. So again, with the linebackers, this could be where their issue could be too. Hill and Waddle combined in the center, 14 of 19 passing receiving, 282 yards and 2 touchdowns. So they are eating it up in the center of the field. Tyreek Hill specifically is killing it down the deep left side of the field. And I think if you, like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, if the Jets defense can get you to throw deep go balls on the perimeter, they've won. Regardless of what happens, it's a 50-50 jump ball. So yeah, you can come down with and make the play. But their defense schematically has won because that's what they want to do. They want to funnel everything to their corners that are dropping in coverage. And that's the strength of their defense right now. So I think that is what I'm really focusing on. Not letting anything over the center of the field, push everything to the perimeter. Those cover 1, those cover 3 corners, they're going to, lock up essentially because it's man-to-man when you get out there on the island and they're running a go and you're running a deep third. So it's man-to-man essentially. And I think this is going to be Sauce's true test. Daniel Jeremiah ranked him number 1 of all his rookies. So maybe it gets to his head. I don't think he's that type of player, but I want to see him build on this now and lock down that number 1 spot on Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So other than that, offensively, Mike McDaniel's a damn genius. I watched some of their 40-minute game, go back and just watch the game and not the film, but he does the weirdest things with his offense. He'll put his fullback out wide and man-to-man and then motion his wide receiver into the backfield. So he's doing a lot of exotic looks. And I think the Jets defense, this is probably going to be one of their tougher tests because Mike McDaniel knows how to carve up a Rob Saleh type defense. He's been there for how many years that he knows the flaws in the defense. So the Jets are going to have to make some adjustments on what they do, maybe shadow with Sauce, potentially Reed as well. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to handle Mike Gesicki. Last year, Michael Carter II kind of struggled against big slot types. So I think it's going to be interesting how they match up. But like you mentioned with Teddy Bridgewater, this defense has a chance to take over the game, be the reason that Zach Wilson gets short field, doesn't have to drive 90 yards. He started inside his 10 2 or 3 times last week. Defense needs to take over again, give them short fields, and I think this might be the matchup where defense, it could be a defensive struggle this week.
Yeah, well, I think that I actually think the opposite only because how banged up Miami is on defense. You look at their injury report. Xavier Howard's not definitely going to go, and they have their injury report right now looks like the Jets' injury report of the previous 3 seasons. Yeah, it's ridiculous. There's like 12 names on there. So I think if their corners are banged up and the Jets can expose that, and then Miami's going to counter with their speedy receivers, I think we could see a shootout in this one. And again, I think it's going to come down to how well the pass rush can get to Teddy Bridgewater.
Yep. Well, that's interesting. I don't know if our predictions will reflect it. I have somewhat of a lower score generally with what the Jets have been scoring this year. I'm not sure if you had any other matchups that you were targeting specifically, but I think other than Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, the only other name of note would be Javon Holland, their second-year safety. He's pretty much a nightmare. He's doing Jamal Adams type things. If you added on the back end coverage skills, I think Javon Holland is somewhat of a total package on as a safety. Not Minkah Fitzpatrick. Minkah Fitzpatrick's more of a free safety type, so not quite what the Jets have seen this year. But do you have any thoughts specifically on their defense, Javon Holland, the types of things they like to do with their pressures that could really affect Zach Wilson this week?
I think their D line is pretty stout, and I do worry that, having said that, Herbig did a nice job. If he's filling in, and AVT, he did a nice job last week. Can you count on him to do that again? I just feel like the Jets, the O line situation is still, even though we know who the starters will be, and they did a decent job this past week, it's still unsettled at best. And if you get Brown back from injury, is he going to be the same guy? So that's probably my biggest concern is that Miami front four, front seven, because they do have some talent up there and some speed and some guys who can wreak havoc up front.
Yeah, and Zach Wilson only faced Miami once last year. Joe Flacco played the other game. Both games were close, though. I think both were decided by less than a touchdown. They were two of the Jets' 4 one-score losses last year. The other two were Tampa Bay and Carolina. So this is the chance. I think we had a foundation to build off of in week 4, offensively and defensively. I think we're starting to turn a corner a little bit. We're getting used to each other as a collective unit. I'm going to go out and throw my prediction out there. It's very hard for me to say this coming off a win, but I kind of fell for it with the Bengals coming out of Cleveland. And I don't think I can project the Jets to win, only because I still think, despite the injuries, I know Miami will have some of them back, not all of those guys potentially. I think this is going to be close, but I think the Jets do end up losing it. 23-21 is my final. So I would assume the Jets cover. I think they're road dogs, or home dogs actually, by like 3.5 points on some books. So I'll take the Jets in the points, but I think it is going to be close, one-score game, probably come down to the final possession. What's your prediction on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to say Jets win 28-27 on a last-second field goal.
Wow, okay. I like that. Greg Zuerlein, man, he's been killing it ever since week 1. I don't think he's missed a field goal or an extra point. So
he's been fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been doing well. And I think for the first time in quite a while, the Jets special teams is not the weekly, why the hell are we doing this to ourselves talking point of the week.
Yeah.
So let's go right into it. We're over the hour point, but that's fine. We're going to get into some draft talk. I brought some names to the table that some I'm not sure if they're even going to declare or if they're going to be, draft-worthy prospects, but I have a group of quarterbacks here that just balled out the last time that they were on the field for their college team, and I think it's nice to talk about names that aren't Bryce Young and CJ Stroud and Will Levis and the big names. So these aren't any of those names. So my first name here, you mentioned his tight end last week, Dalton Kincaid. Utah's Cam Rising last week against Oregon State. They won 42-16. He had 19 of 25 passing, so 76%, 199 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also had 73 yards on the ground with a rushing touchdown as well. He's a Texas transfer. I believe they chose Hudson Card over him, the guy that's currently playing while Quinn Ewers is recovering from injury. So Cam Rising got shipped to Utah, and he's one of those, like you were saying with the Wake Forest quarterback, he's one of those mobile types, and he isn't afraid to take off and run. Obviously, he had 10 yards per attempt here last week with a rushing tutty. So you love to see the mobility of guys like him, and I think for him at Utah, the Pac-12, they have a chance to take it. I know USC is kind of explosive, and it'll be tough to see if they match up with USC, but Cam Rising could lead Utah to a Pac-12 championship if Utah plays tough. They had a corner that had 3 picks, 1 for 6. His name's Clark Phillips. he's going to be another name to watch from the Utah program going forward. But I think Cam Rising and Utah have something cooking here, and they could really slide in and sneak into the Pac-12 and take it. My second quarterback, he actually didn't play last week, but the week before, he had a big victory over Florida. That's Tennessee's Hendon Hooker. He won 38-33 over Florida. He had 22 of 28 passing, 349 yards, 2 touchdowns, and another 112 yards on the ground with a score. I looked at his PFR, Pro Football Reference stats. He was a Virginia Tech transfer. He's actually a 6th-year player, 25 years old. If he came out in the draft, he'd be a 25-year-old draftee. So older, and, people seem to be weary about those types of prospects. But in his last 17 games, so 13 from last year and 4 from this year, he has a 68.9% completion percentage, 4,100 yards, 39 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Then you add 800 yards on the ground with 8 touchdowns. I think Hendon Hooker could be a total package as a late day guy. I'm not sure if he'll ever get up to that round 1 type of guy. I know Joe Burrow is an older prospect, but I don't think Hendon Hooker's even anywhere near being talked about like Joe Burrow. So he's somebody that's an older guy that could sneak into the back end of the draft and actually be somebody for a team based off his production here. And then my last one, I have never heard this guy's name talked about in draft circles or, any podcast I've listened to, but the TCU quarterback, Max Duggan, he had a huge upset win over Oklahoma, 55-24, which is very unlike Oklahoma recently, at least. 23 of 33, so just under 70%, 302 yards with 3 touchdowns, 116 yards on the ground on 5 carries. Almost 20 or 17 yards per carry it was, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So 5 total touchdowns for him. He was the lead dog for TCU. And I know they have some wide receivers that I've been trying to watch if they ever get the ball, like Quentin Johnston. But Max Duggan absolutely balled out for his team and upset Oklahoma. So those are my 3 guys. I wanted to keep it all to quarterbacks. Obviously, the Jets don't need a quarterback based off what Zach Wilson did last week, but I just think it's nice to bring these names to the table that aren't the top guys and get these names out there because they could be guys, and we never know what happens on day 3. So I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually watched that TCU Oklahoma game, and I thought Duggan looked fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I watched the game, and Dylan, we do this as a hobby, and I don't know if people realize we don't really have the chance to watch 1,000 college players. So one thing that I was reminded of this week is some of the guys that I loved during last year's process, not knowing if they were coming out, not guys who I took notes on and pulled some of their highlights that I'd kind of forgotten about and I hadn't looked at yet this year until this past weekend. And it's like, Jesus, these guys completely slipped my mind because you're trying to watch literally hundreds of players.
Yeah.
But I'll start with TCU because that's what Duggan. I was watching to get a look at a couple of different players, but one guy in particular was Kendre Miller, the TCU running back. That guy's super explosive. He's at 7.6 a carry this year, 7.4 a carry for his entire college career, just under 200 carries. He's at 7.4 a touch. 14 touchdowns, doesn't catch the ball as often as I'd like to see, so I can't really say for sure. Sometimes a guy doesn't have good hands because they don't throw the ball to him a lot, but sometimes that's just not their scheme, so they don't. But
Breece
even
Hall.
Still, what's that?
Breece Hall, the same way. I think
Yeah,
people
exactly.
were concerned.
That's not nearly as much as you would have thought. But Miller, I think, for TCU has been fantastic. Then Boston College, a guy, one of the first guys I watched last year who I really liked, Zay Flowers. Honestly, kind of forgot about him a little bit. I don't know if you saw that catch he made this week, that touchdown grab, like that, fingertip grab between 2 defenders. And I was like, I just watched that catch and thought, oh my God, I haven't watched any of him this year. I loved him last year. And so I'm going to be watching him this weekend because I haven't watched him yet this season. And then third guy, this one's in, guys like this, Charlie Jones. I'd never heard of him before this week. as I messaged you the other day, said I was watching that Purdue Penn State game because I wanted to get a look at some Penn State players and some Purdue players, but mostly Joey Porter Jr. was the main reason I was watching that one. And Charlie Jones out of nowhere, like I said, never heard of the guy before that game. He had a couple catches early on. I thought, okay, I didn't think much of it. By the end of the game, and again, this is against Penn State. It's not like he's playing a small school. 12 catches for 153 and a touchdown. And I was like, Jesus, who is this guy? So I go and look at what kind of year he's having, if that fluke game. So he has he's got 588 yards and 7 touchdowns through 5 games. Prior to that, he played at Buffalo and Iowa, and in his 3 previous seasons, he had just over 700 yards and 6 touchdowns. So if he continues on this pace, there's a good chance that this week he will surpass his combined totals from the 3 previous seasons all combined. Yeah, so again, he just looked like a sure-handed guy, caught everything that came his way, was able to create enough separation to make plays. One of his touchdowns was really the product of fantastic pass pro. I mean, against Penn State, he had one at the back of the end zone where it felt like the play took about 13 seconds to unfold. But all in all, I mean, super productive. So I'm looking forward to watching him this week. So those are my 3 or 4 guys I'm throwing in there. Oh, the 4th guy, real quick, he's not. He hasn't played a whole lot. Actually, you know what? I'll leave him out. There was a Purdue linebacker who got hurt in week 1, so he's been out since then. Number 6. His name is even escaping me at the moment. He looked all right in that game. I thought he looked good, so I looked him up, and he apparently got hurt in that game and hasn't played since. And he's the top-rated player for Purdue this year.
Wow. Yep. I actually heard Charlie Jones's name earlier this week, and I just had added him to my database. And I can tell because I have a couple cells missing when I just add new players. But he's 6 foot 188, so he's the type of wide receiver that I'll like to watch personally because obviously the Elijah Moore types. But yeah, I'm really excited because this is the second time I've heard his name. And now I got to start watching Purdue because normally you don't really think of Purdue as having flashy playmakers. But hey, if they got a guy, I'm willing to watch him. So Charlie Jones, I have him on my list.
Yeah, he went for that Penn State game. He went for 153. Then the following week they played. Okay, State, not a big deal, 133. Then they played Syracuse, and he had 11 for 188 and a touchdown. So he's toasting people. And the Purdue guy whose name I couldn't remember was Jalen Graham, linebacker Jalen Graham, number 6.
Okay. I don't have him yet. I'm seeing in my linebackers, but I'll definitely add him. All right. I think that's it. I mean, we ran a little bit over, 12 minutes over. That's all right. Do you have any final thoughts on the game this week coming up? I'll be at the game. I'll be at JetNation's tailgate, lot J3, I believe it is. So if anybody's at the game and wants to come hang out at our tailgate, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to have you guys come over. I'll probably be trying to watch the Giants-Packers game in London, honestly. But it's going to be fun, and I'm looking forward to it. Any last words for you about this game coming up?
No, I was actually going to say, for those who are going to be in attendance, try to pop over to the JetNation tailgate. They've been doing this kind of, I think the 3rd year in a row. They try to do once a year. They do an outing. Great people at JetNation. Check out the forums. Log in. I say it all the time. Most active Jets message board. And that's the thing. Like message boards to me aren't as big as they used to be, but the numbers JetNation pulls are still insane. Like they routinely have months with like over 1,000 hits or over 1 million hits.
1 million. Yeah, there's diehards in there. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, some of the people on that board have been there for decades, and we're constantly getting new members. And to me, it's better than Twitter because you can have long, drawn out conversations where you can post stats and graphs and charts and video and things like that, and sort of walk through an explanation of a player or a play, and you're not limited in your characters. So yeah, check out the forums at JetNation.com if you can, and if you're at the game this week, seek them out and check out the tailgate.
Yeah, absolutely. The forums are wild. They do get hairy. I've posted a lot in there, and I can just read for days on all the comments. You can never respond to all of them. It's a good time. You got to pick and choose, but it's a good time when you get in there and really dig into it. So, that's going to do it for us. Week 5, the Jets are going to try to get to 3-2. It's just absolutely insane to think about. We can have a winning record in October. It feels good. I'm excited. Yeah, imagine that, right? All right, for Glenn Naughton, you can follow him at AceFan23 on Twitter. I'm at DTerriman on Twitter. Follow us at JetNation. Like Glenn said, join the forums. And until next time, let's go Jets.